I didn't want anything grand for my birthday. No cakes shaped like roses, no forced karaoke, no waiters singing in clashing harmonies. I just wanted one simple dinner. Just me, my son Bram, his wife Tierney, and a few of their friends at a place they chose. A glass of wine, good food, and the chance to feel for just a moment like I was still a part of something that hadn't fully drifted. The restaurant was trendy in the way all new Chicago places seemed to be exposed. Brick-hanging bulbs that buzzed faintly overhead concrete floors that amplified every step. Tierney loved places like this, the kind that served dinner on slate boards and handed you menus with QR codes. I had barely sat down when she handed me a gift bag. Tissue paper puffed out the top like a pastry. She beamed. "Open it now," she said. Inside was a baby onesie that read, "Best Grandma Ever" in soft blue print. I smiled, confused. Bram watched me carefully from across the table. "We thought it was time," Tierney said, her voice sugar-sweet, "to start planning the nursery. Right, Bram?" He nodded once, a tight, practiced motion. "Yeah, especially since we'll have more space soon." I blinked, still holding the onesie in my hands. "More space." Tierney leaned in. "We're just so grateful you agreed, Callista." I looked at her, then at Bram. Something in his eyes had already braced for what was next. He stood up and tapped a spoon against his glass. "Can I have everyone's attention for a second?" he said. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating my incredible mom turning 61. He glanced at Tierney, who had her phone out recording already. "It's also about a big change in our family." The clinking stopped. The servers paused in the background. Bram raised his glass. "We're moving into Mom's apartment." Laughter, cheers, forks lifted. Someone said, "Congrats, I didn't move." "It just makes sense," he added. "She doesn't need all that space anymore. And we're starting a family." Tierney smiled wide and bright, panning her camera toward me. "It's such a gift, honestly. So generous." Bram raised his glass higher. "To the woman who made it happen." I stared at him, at both of them, then at the table. My fork hung in midair, forgotten between a cold piece of salmon and a wedge of lemon. Right, Mom. I could feel it, the pressure. It locked around me like a snap trap. I nodded, not because I agreed, because I didn't know what else to do. Because the room had become a stage and I had no lines in the script they'd written without me. I lifted my wine glass, forced a smile, took a sip I didn't taste. The conversation resumed without me. Tierney launched into talk about redecorating, paint swatches, crib placements. "Of course we'll let you visit." She laughed. "You can keep your plants on the balcony if you want." Bram added, "We'll give you plenty of time to move, no pressure." No one noticed the way my shoulders stiffened. No one asked if I had agreed to any of this. They hadn't asked me at all. They had decided. They had announced it. And everyone around that table was treating it like a kindness, like a tribute, like some passing of the torch from an old life to a new one. I excused myself before dessert, said I wasn't feeling well. Bram gave me a look like I was being dramatic. Tierney offered to call me a car. I said no. I walked 3 blocks in those heels until my toes ached and my chest burned and the cold cut straight through my coat. By the time I got home, my key shook in the lock. I closed the door behind me and stood in the dark for a long time, coat still on shoes, pinching. The apartment was quiet, but not in a way that brought comfort. It felt like something had been broken wide open, and I was the only one who noticed. I hadn't said yes. I hadn't even spoken. But they had filmed me smiling faintly, lifting a glass, nodding on cue. And that was enough. That was all they needed. A short clip, a sweet caption, a dozen witnesses nodding along with champagne still in their hands. I turned on the hallway light. My husband's photo sat on the bookshelf near the door, same place it had been for over a decade. I looked at him and whispered, "Did I miss something?" Or did they just rewrite the story without me? In the kitchen, I poured a glass of water, but didn't drink it. My stomach was a knot. I stared at the tile beneath my feet, suddenly remembering how we'd chosen it together, arguing over patterns and budget. He wanted something warm-toned. I thought slate would hide the dirt. We compromised like we always had. They wanted to take this place, and worse, they'd made it look like I offered it up. My phone buzzed. A message from Tierney. "Hope you're feeling okay?" Everyone said it was such a beautiful moment. "We're just so grateful you agreed. Can't wait to start making it ours." I sat down, read the message again. Agreed. She typed it like it was fact, like it had already been filed, printed, signed. My hands stayed still in my lap, phone screen glowing against my skin. I hadn't agreed, but I hadn't disagreed either. I'd smiled, I'd nodded, I'd raised a glass. And apparently, that's all it took. I opened the video. Just 6 seconds. Bram's toast, Tierney's cheer, and then me. My face flickering on the screen caught just as I lifted my glass. A slow smile, the kind you wear when you're surrounded by people you don't want to embarrass. The comments below it were worse. "She's the sweetest." Not many moms would do that. Giving up her space for the next generation? That's love. I turned off the phone. What I had done was panic. What I had done was freeze. I'd been maneuvered into a corner, boxed in by their timing, the crowd, the lens of a camera pointed just right. And now I had agreed to something I hadn't even known was up for discussion. The next morning, the apartment felt colder than usual. I moved through it slowly, noticing things I hadn't paid attention to in years. The way the light came in through the lace curtains Bram used to pull on as a toddler. The dent in the hallway floor where my husband once dropped a toolbox. The wobbly kitchen chair Bram had broken when he was 17 and never fixed. I opened the pantry, looked at the jars, the spices, the flour tin with the handwritten label. This was not just space. This was my life. And yet someone else had already begun planning what color to paint the nursery in it. My phone buzzed again. This time from Bram. "Hey, can you send us the measurements of the second bedroom? We're thinking of putting the crib against the far wall but want to be sure it fits." I didn't reply. I closed the pantry door. Tight. Then I walked down the hallway, opened the linen closet, and reached for the box labeled legal joint. It had sat untouched since the year my husband got sick. I carried it to the kitchen table and lifted the lid. The box on the kitchen table stared back at me. It was just cardboard worn at the edges, taped once then again. I'd labeled it in black ink sometime after his diagnosis. That was the year everything became labeled pills by our insurance forms, by drawer grief by the day. I didn't open it right away. I just sat there staring at the word joint scribbled across the top. Back then it meant shared, marriage, assets, life. Now it felt more like entanglement. I had no idea what they were relying on to stake this quiet claim over my apartment. But something in my chest told me Bram hadn't come up with this overnight. And I'd be foolish to pretend otherwise. The apartment was too quiet. Usually that comforted me, but that night, it was a hollow kind of silence, the kind that makes you second-guess the creaks in the walls. I pushed the box aside, stood, and walked the rooms. Every step sounded louder than it should have. The same floorboards, the same pictures, but the air felt thinner, like someone had cracked a window I hadn't noticed. I ended up in the hallway, staring at a small square photo of Bram when he was 8, missing a front tooth, one shoelace undone, holding a kite. My husband had taken it on a windy day in Grant Park. The smile in that photo was real, untouched. He hadn't needed anything from me back then, except maybe a snack and help tying his shoes. I closed my eyes. Tierney's voice played again in my head. We're just so grateful you agreed. That apartment, our home, had weathered storms. Pipes burst one winter. I'd spent hours with a wrench in hand, water soaking my jeans because we couldn't afford a plumber. Bram had been in college when that happened. I didn't tell him. I just fixed it, quietly, because that's what you do when something is yours. You don't make announcements. You repair. You preserve. I walked into my bedroom. Nothing had moved, but everything felt invaded. I noticed for the first time how many little things still had both our names on them, his and mine. The home insurance documents in the nightstand. The tax folder beside my winter scarves. Our mortgage long paid off still sat printed and stamped in the back of the filing drawer. I sat on the edge of the bed. My fingers itched to call someone, but who my sister had her own chaos always had. And Bram had gone from calling me Mom with warmth to calling me Mom with expectation. He wasn't asking for space. He was taking it. I got up and walked to the living room. The air in here always smelled faintly of the books my husband refused to part with. I had kept them. They lined the built-in shelves we argued over during the first remodel. Tierney had called them outdated at dinner, said she might donate them. Like they were clutter. I leaned down and pulled the bottom cabinet open. Inside was a small fireproof box we'd bought after the neighbor's kitchen fire a decade ago. It still held our old wills. My hands shook a little as I pulled the papers free. I'd forgotten how much he'd written in, how he'd taken the time to outline contingencies for almost everything. Bram's name was there, of course it was, but only as a backup, only if something had happened to me. I stared at the signature line, my name beside his. I hadn't touched this since the year after he passed. I hadn't needed to. Until now. I turned to the back page, a form, tucked neatly between legal jargon, and Bram's name was already typed in. I must have read the header 5 times: limited power of attorney, temporary medical incapacity. The signature date was 2 years ago. February. That checked out. The same week, I'd been admitted for pneumonia after ignoring symptoms too long. I remembered Bram sitting at the foot of the hospital bed, clipboard in hand, saying something about helping with insurance paperwork. Just sign so I can handle the billing stuff, he'd said. You're exhausted. Let me take care of it. I was exhausted. I'd had an IV in one arm and an oxygen mask off and on for days. The hospital lights made everything look yellow. I'd scribbled my name just to get him to stop hovering. Now, reading it clearly, I saw the terms. Authority to make financial and legal decisions during a period of confirmed incapacity. Confirmed by who the form didn't say. Just a vague line about licensed physician and reasonable evidence of impairment. It wasn't active now, not unless someone declared I was mentally unfit. But it existed. It had my name. His name. It had weight. And Bram knew it existed. I held the document for a long time. My mouth felt dry. There was a time when I would have laughed at the thought my own son needing legal permission to help me pay a bill. But this wasn't help. It was leverage. If he'd remembered this form, and based on that dinner performance I was sure he had, then he wasn't just hoping I'd step aside. He was planning to push. I folded the paper and placed it gently on the table. Then I reached for my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't touched in almost a year. Lenore Bexley, my old friend and lawyer. You free this week, I texted. It's urgent. Regarding a dormant POA form. Possible misuse. Her reply came 10 minutes later. If it's still active and not revoked, yes, he may have limited access. Come in tomorrow. Bring everything. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about the way Bram had raised his glass, how calm he'd been, how rehearsed. It hadn't been the giddy excitement of a son announcing surprise plans. It was calculated, like he was checking something off a list. The next morning, I dressed with more intention than usual, slacks, button-up shirt, flat shoes that made a confident sound on tile. I brought every file I could find: property deeds, tax records, that old POA, the fireproof box, even the worn envelope from the hospital that still held the wristband I'd never thrown out. Lenore's office was a narrow brick building tucked between a notary shop and a barber shop. She was already waiting when I arrived. She didn't waste time with pleasantries, just pointed to the chair and said, "Show me." I laid everything out on her desk. She sifted through the pages quickly but carefully, her lips pressed into a line. When she reached the POA, she didn't blink. "You never revoked this, Callista, no. I forgot it existed. Well, it's not full control, but it's enough. Technically, if a doctor says you're showing cognitive decline, even just on a form, he could use this to start legal proceedings. Freeze accounts. Challenge ownership." I stared at her. "But I'm not impaired." "I know that. But he doesn't have to prove a diagnosis. Just cast enough doubt." The blood drained from my face. She leaned forward and rested a hand over the document. "We're revoking this today. And from now on, every single interaction with Bram or Tierney goes through me. You don't speak, sign, or reply unless I see it first. Do you understand?" I nodded. And that was when I realized I wasn't preparing for a difficult conversation. I was preparing for a fight. Lenore pulled out a fresh legal pad. "Let's start with a list of what's in your name and where it lives." The video showed up on my phone the next morning. I hadn't even opened the app, just one of those automatic previews that start playing whether you ask for them or not. It was a slow, cinematic pan of my living room, my bookshelf, the arched window I'd had resealed 2 winters ago, the couch with the coffee stain Bram made during a late-night high school study binge. Tierney's caption read, "Saying goodbye to Grandma's place. Hello to our new chapter." There was acoustic guitar playing softly in the background. Sepia-toned filters made the space look warmer than it felt. And the title card at the bottom, "Our first family home," made my breath catch. I clicked into the video, half in disbelief, half in dread. There she was, panning across my kitchen, the same cabinets my husband built when Bram was 6. She focused the camera on the spot where she'd once said she'd install a coffee bar. Her voice, chipper and sentimental, filled the audio. "We've been so blessed. Callista is passing down her home so we can raise our family. Not every mom is this giving. She's one of a kind." The comments poured in. "You're so lucky my mill would never do something like this. What a generous heart. This is what real love between generations looks like." I stopped reading. I hadn't passed anything down. I hadn't even spoken since that dinner. But to the internet, to the world, I was already the generous grandmother, fading quietly into the background with a warm smile and an empty apartment. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my phone. My reflection glared back at me from the screen, tight-lipped, rigid, nothing like the woman they imagined. This wasn't just Tierney's version of the story. It was her production. I opened my texts. Bram had sent one at 7:14 a.m. "Hey, we're going to start measuring the office space. Tier thinks a crib will fit best along the west wall. Can you clear that area sometime this week?" No greeting, no check-in. Just an assumption that the space was already his. I didn't reply. Instead, I went into the hall closet, pulled down a box labeled Photos, Early Years, and took it to the dining table. I sifted through the memories: Bram's elementary field day, his 13th birthday party, where he insisted on wearing a suit and tie, his college acceptance letter taped to the fridge. There was no photo of the man he had become. I looked at one image, him standing in the doorway of this apartment, bags in hand after a bad breakup in his 20s. He'd stayed for 2 months, cried at the kitchen table, called me every night when he was out late, just so I wouldn't worry. He'd called it home back then, too, but it had meant something else. Now it meant property, footage, leverage. I tucked the photos back in the box and walked to the bookshelf. My husband's favorite books were still there. Worn spines, dog-eared corners. He'd hated when people mistook kindness for surrender. He'd once said silence is fine, but don't confuse it with permission. Tierney had confused it. Deliberately. Publicly. And now the world thought they were moving into a home I'd gifted with joy. I opened a drawer in the coffee table, pulled out the folder Bram had left years ago, labeled Shared Finances. College. Beneath it were a few old bank statements and a set of keys I didn't recognize. Then I found it. A typed list in Tierney's handwriting: nursery themes, paint colors, budget for soft remodel. I turned the page and saw it a crude mock-up of the apartment layout. Every room labeled. And my name wasn't on any of them. The email came late. 11:38 p.m. The subject line read, Transition Planning, Timeline, and Notes. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Part of me already knew what it would say. Bram's tone was chipper, like he was managing a team project. Hi, Mom. Just wanted to get ahead of the process so things feel smooth and low stress for everyone. Tierney and I put together a rough outline of the transition dates, totally flexible, of course. We just thought this would be easiest for planning purposes. Let us know if you have any questions. There were attachments. The first was a PDF labeled Move-In Strategy. 6 pages. Each week broken into tasks. Week 1, declutter secondary bedrooms. Week 2, remove furniture not aligned with nursery vision. Week 3, repaint. Then a checklist. Callista to relocate sentimental items by the 12th utility account name transfer, by the 15th Tierney, to begin measuring window treatments. Crib delivery scheduled for the 18th baby shower venue. TBD apartment or rooftop lounge. I scrolled down, sick rising in my throat. There was also a Pinterest link, Baby Haven Aesthetic, gender neutral. The board had over 40 pins. Cream walls, tiny cloud mobiles, natural wood furniture, eucalyptus garlands. All tagged our future home. Their future home. The last attachment was a document titled Preliminary Deed Transfer for review. It was a legal template standard residential transfer of ownership. My name was already typed in under current owner. Bram's and Tierney's under new occupants. The signature line next to mine was blank. I closed the laptop. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat still, hands flat on the kitchen table, eyes fixed on the cabinet above the stove where I kept my coffee grounds. It had become a ritual since my husband died, coffee before decisions. That night, I didn't make any, but in the morning, I read the documents again, this time with a pen in hand. They had built a future inside my walls, painted it, named it, mapped it before I'd even handed over a key. It wasn't just entitled, it was invasive. I forwarded the email to Lenore. This came last night. Please advise before I respond. She replied in under 15 minutes. Do not engage. They are creating a paper trail that implies you're involved voluntarily. We need to make your position legally unambiguous. I turned off my laptop. Every photo, every list, every week-by-week breakdown, they'd all been written under the assumption I'd given up, that I was ready to shrink down into something that didn't take up space. But they'd misread me. I wasn't generous. I was quiet. That's not the same. That afternoon, I went to the filing cabinet and dug deeper. Past old insurance statements and expired coupons down to the paperwork from when Bram had been in college and begged me to co-sign his first lease. I found the original deed to the apartment. Then I pulled out another folder, one I hadn't touched in years. My husband's final will and instructions. Inside, his handwriting stared back at me. If anything happens, protect the home first. Don't trust charm. Trust paper. Paper. I sat down and opened a clean notebook, labeled the top counter plan. I listed what I knew, what they'd said, what they'd posted, what they hadn't asked. Then I began writing down what was mine. That list was longer, and it was going to stay that way. Lenore didn't blink when I handed her the deed transfer, just adjusted her glasses and kept reading her finger, tracing each line like she was searching for the rot in wood. "This is what they sent you?" she asked. I nodded. "And you never signed anything? Not a word? Not a pixel?" She looked up, face unreadable. "Then they're building a narrative without you. A dangerous one." I shifted in the chair. "Could they actually take the apartment?" "Not outright," she said, "but they're creating a sequence of events that frames your consent. Combined with the POA even limited, they could present a claim of cognitive decline." "I'm not declining," I said sharply. "I know. But if they can convince a physician to write a note just vague enough, it wouldn't need to be a diagnosis. Just a suspicion." I stared at her. She leaned back. "These cases happen more often than you'd think, especially when property's involved, especially when family knows what paperwork you've forgotten." I sat quietly. My hands were cold. Lenore tapped the desk once. "We'll file a formal revocation of power of attorney today. That document Bram's holding, it dies the second this one is stamped." I nodded. She continued, "We'll also draft a letter informing him and Tierney that all legal communications must go through my office. No exceptions. If they try to contact you directly about the apartment, you don't respond." I looked down at my lap. "So I just sit here while they post videos and talk about cribs?" "No," she said. "You document. Every message, every voicemail, screenshot the posts. Send them to me. Don't engage. Just collect. Think of it as evidence." I left her office with a folder under my arm and a feeling I hadn't had in years prepared. Not angry, not even sad. Just sharp. Clear. By the time I got home, I had already started the process. I opened a new folder on my desktop. Labeled it Proof. I went back to Tierney's Instagram, Bram's Facebook. Screenshotted everything. The video tour, the nursery pins, the comments saying I was a saint of a mother. All of it. Then I opened a drawer and pulled out a notebook. Started handwriting an account of that dinner, what they said, how they said it, who was there, how I felt. Not because I thought anyone would read it, because I needed the truth to live somewhere untouched by filters or spin. That night, I made a checklist. A real one. Contact building manager. Change locks, photograph apartment for inventory. Secure birth certificate, ID, passport. Update, emergency contact list. All financial accounts. Remove Bram from anything with access. I poured a glass of water and sat by the window, notebook in hand. There was a time when I would have called him. First, asked him what he was thinking, given him the chance to walk it back. But Bram hadn't stumbled into this. He'd planned it, scripted it. He'd used my birthday as a stage, my silence as his green light. And now, with Lenore in my corner, I wasn't waiting for him to reveal the next move. I was preparing for it. The next morning, I woke early, made coffee, and pulled out the lease agreement from when I first bought this apartment. It still had the date in blue ink. The year Bram turned 7. He used to call it the Forever Place. I tucked it into the same folder I'd started for Lenore and added a sticky note, not just sentimental proof of continuity. Built this before they were old enough to take it. Then I called the building manager and asked him a simple question. Who used the spare key this week? She knocked like it was casual. 2 light taps. Then a pause. No text, no warning, just her voice outside my door. Hi, I brought you something. I didn't answer at first. I just watched her through the peephole. Tierney stood there with a coffee in one hand and a white gift bag in the other, swaying slightly on her heels like she wasn't sure if she should knock again. I opened the door only halfway. Iced hazelnut cream, she said brightly. Extra ice, just how you like it. I didn't reach for it. She hesitated. Thought I'd stop in and check on you. You've been a little quiet and well. We've got a lot coming up. Just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. Still, I didn't move. She tilted her head, trying for charm. Mind if I come in? I stepped back. Not because I wanted her in, but because I needed to see what she was holding. The bag swung gently as she passed me, and she set it down on the counter. Vitamins, she said, patting it. Prenatals. We're hoping. It just felt right after the dinner. She placed a hand on her flat stomach precisely too easily. I didn't say a word. She kept talking. We weren't going to say anything yet, but the timing just seemed perfect. New chapter, new family. You've already given us so much. She wandered into the living room as if the apartment already belonged to her. This couch, she said, tapping the arm. We could reupholster maybe oatmeal or sage. The wall behind it, perfect for family photos. And that bookshelf. Her voice trailed off with a slight grimace. It's a little vintage. Probably doesn't match the nursery aesthetic. I didn't respond. Just stood in the kitchen listening to her outline renovations she had no right to plan. Then she moved toward the hallway. Oh, and the sewing room. That'll make the sweetest nursery. So much natural light. And let's be honest, it's not like you still use it every day. She was halfway through mapping out furniture placement when I interrupted. Tierney, I said steady. When did a doctor confirm the pregnancy? She blinked. It's early. No tests yet. We just... No. I can feel it. I watched her carefully. No caution in her steps, no hesitation when she picked up her iced coffee again and sipped it. No regard for the caffeine, the sugar, the carbonation. No pregnancy. She wasn't there to share news. She was there to reinforce a narrative, to smile while she made my apartment feel less mine with every comment. And I let her wander because I wanted her comfortable just long enough. When she went to the bathroom, I saw it. Her purse unzipped, left on the counter. I looked inside. A manila folder. Inside, printed floor plans of the apartment with furniture marked and labeled. A Zillow estimate circled in red ink. A typed checklist titled Staging Plan Unit 4D. They weren't moving in. They were flipping it. Maybe not publicly. Maybe not yet. But the way she had breezed through my rooms, the way she'd tested every sentence like she was auditioning for a buyer, it was all rehearsed. I snapped a quick photo of the folder and placed everything back exactly how she left it. She returned a minute later, cheeks slightly flushed. So, dinner sometime this week, I smiled politely. Sure, just us. Her grin widened. Great, I'll tell Bram. She took her bag and left. I locked the door behind her, slid the bolt, then pulled my heavy sewing machine in front of it. And for the first time, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. She had barely shut the door behind her before I grabbed my phone and opened the photo I'd taken. It wasn't grainy. It wasn't vague. The manila folder sat in her purse wide open. The words Staging Plan Unit 4D in bold across the top. She hadn't been hiding it. That was the part that stuck with me. She had left it in plain sight, like she assumed I wouldn't know what it meant or wouldn't dare to look. I made a new folder in my photo gallery and titled it Proof. Then I dropped the image in and backed it up twice. After that, I sat at the kitchen table and tried to remember everything she'd said. Her tone had been too smooth, her hands too still. No fidgeting, no raw nerves. Tierney had always been composed, but that day she'd been polished to the point of performance. And yet the details didn't add up. No ultrasound. No appointment already done. Just hope, just timing, just a feeling. And then there was the sparkling water. I remembered watching her open the fridge without even glancing at the label, pulling out the first bottle she saw, cracking the seal and drinking half of it before I could say a word. It was ginger lime, caffeinated. No one newly pregnant does that without hesitation. She hadn't hesitated, not once. The vitamins in the bag, still sealed. The receipt from the drugstore tucked underneath. bought that morning. This wasn't a reveal. It was a setup. They were dressing the idea of a baby in soft lighting and good intentions, hoping I'd hand over the apartment on instinct out of emotion. But they weren't just playing sentimental. They were strategic. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. Not yet. I didn't call Bram. I didn't text Tierney. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water, plain cold, and sat down with a notebook. I began writing down the timeline. The dinner, the first mention of more space, the toast, the email, the real estate plans, her visit. And now this, an unconfirmed pregnancy announced like fact, with no evidence beyond a hand resting gently on a flat stomach. Every moment documented. No gaps. The next morning, I received a text from Bram. Glad Tier checked in. She said you two had a nice talk. Let us know when's good for movers to assess the space. Not a question. I didn't reply. A few hours later, another ping. Also, can you confirm the couch size Tierney's thinking it might not match the new layout? Might be easier if we just list it for pickup. I stared at the screen. My couch. The one I'd slept on for 3 weeks after my husband's funeral, because I couldn't face the bedroom alone. They wanted to list it, sell it, clear it out like debris from a job site. I set my phone down without responding. That afternoon, I went into the sewing room, pulled out the old Singer machine and placed it in the center of the floor. Opened the window, let the light pour in, sat down and stitched 2 lines of fabric, not for purpose, but for proof. I was here. I was using this space. I was not some invisible handoff. Later that night, I received a third text. This time, just a photo. Tierney, standing in front of the hallway mirror, her hand on her stomach, with the caption, "Just feels right already. Can't wait to start this chapter." I saved it, didn't reply. Then I opened my folder labeled Proof, printed what I had so far, and placed it neatly in my lockbox beneath the bed. They thought they were building a case. So was I. The first thing I did the next morning was pull the old filing cabinet out from under the hallway table. It scraped against the wood, heavy and uneven, still dented from the move 29 years ago when Bram was in middle school and tried to help with his toy wagon. I opened it and started from the bottom drawer. There were papers I hadn't looked at in decades. Utility bills from when rates were still under $30, a faded birth certificate, tax returns, wedding programs, a postcard from Bram during his college semester abroad, something about street markets in Barcelona and missing home-cooked meals. I put that one aside. Then I started organizing. Anything that had my name and money attached to Bram, I kept. The loan agreement from when he lost his scholarship sophomore year, and I paid the rest of his tuition. The florist invoice from their wedding, I'd covered the centerpieces and half the catering. The bank transfers for the IVF loan 2 years ago, the one they never repaid. A note scribbled in Bram's handwriting. Just until our tax return clears, thanks, Mom. It never cleared. Every document went into a labeled folder. I added dates, amounts, and purpose. Then I created a second section. Verbal claims. I filled it with summaries of conversations, who said what, when, and what it implied. I dated each one, then signed the bottom of every page in pen. It was tedious, and it made me feel like a stranger in my own life, watching a mother's generosity reframed as leverage. But I needed it. Not to fight with them, to defend myself, because it was clear now they weren't planning a future with me. They were planning a future from me, and if I didn't build a wall of facts, they'd bulldoze my name and call it family. I added a new routine to my day. Every morning after coffee, I journaled, just 3 sentences. What I remembered, what I planned, what I noticed. I included handwriting samples, grocery lists, notes to myself, anything to timestamp my clarity. At night, I'd scan each page and email it to a folder my lawyer had access to. No one knew the password but us. Some nights, I'd include printouts from their social media videos of nursery inspiration captions about turning Grandma's apartment into a forever home. It was surreal to see my own living room reframed through someone else's ambition. Sometimes I had to pause, not from sadness, but from disbelief, because I had given them everything they asked for: help, time, money, support, rooms to sleep in when they were broke, keys when they needed a weekend away, and they were turning it into a story about entitlement, as if I owed them the last square inch of my own home. That week, I stopped taking my sleep aid. I needed my brain sharp. I needed my words traceable. I started signing and dating sticky notes. Call Iris about the car. Pick up dry cleaning. Don't forget rent control renewal. One night, I made a fake grocery list just to timestamp the ink. I wasn't being paranoid. I was documenting my presence, because the more I looked through the papers, the clearer it became Bram had always taken, and I had always given. Quietly, willingly, until now. I snapped the lock on the filing cabinet and pushed it back beneath the table, sealing every folder inside. The next morning, I made a call I hadn't made in years. One I'd avoided. Iris picked up on the first ring. Iris didn't ask for explanations. She didn't need them. "You finally calling about the apartment," she said before I could get a full sentence out. "I am." She let out a short breath. "I wondered when they'd push you too far." "I can do it, Callie, but it has to be quiet. Fast and quiet." "That's what I need," I said. "No listings, no for sale sign, nothing public." Iris had been out of the real estate game for years, retired early, turned down every referral unless it came from someone she trusted. But she still knew how to move property like a shadow. No websites, no photos in glossy brochures, just a call to the right kind of buyer, the ones who paid in cash and didn't ask why. "Send me pictures," she said, "of every room, every corner, specs. Building info. Do not touch up anything but clean up the clutter. Make it look like you lived there with pride." I stayed up late that night vacuuming, folding, wiping down surfaces with care I hadn't used in weeks. Not to impress, to remember. I snapped a photo of the view from the window, the exact spot I stood when Bram called to say they were ready for the next chapter. I took another of the built-in cabinet my husband had installed himself the year before he passed. I sent everything to Iris before sunrise. By noon, she'd already found 3 interested parties. One stood out, a widow from Evanston looking to downsize. She liked older buildings, original woodwork, and quiet neighbors. Didn't care about modern finishes. Wanted something fast but under the radar. She can wire funds within 72 hours, Iris told me. You'll get slightly less than market, but it keeps this off their radar. That's the goal. That night I printed out the buyer's details, then sat at the kitchen table labeling boxes, not to pack, yet just to plan. Keep. Donate. Move to cabin. I hadn't found the cabin yet, but I wrote it like it already existed. I needed to believe it was waiting for me. Tierney texted the next day. Saw a rocking chair on Marketplace would look perfect in the front room. Thoughts. No greeting, no punctuation, just another assumption. I didn't answer. Instead, I printed the message, added it to my folder, and called the building manager. "I'm changing my emergency contact," I told him. "Effective immediately. No one in the family should be contacted unless I say otherwise." He paused. "Of course. Is everything okay?" "Everything's about to be." The next day, I visited the leasing office, signed the lock change request, removed Bram's name from the spare key file, asked for all maintenance alerts to come directly to me, no courtesy calls to family. Every door they thought they could walk through, I sealed. By the time Iris called again, the buyer had submitted the offer. All cash, she said. No inspection, no financing. Closing in 7 days. You accept, I accept. She didn't congratulate me. She didn't need to. She just said, "Start moving the things you want to keep, and don't tell anyone where you're going, not until you're gone." So I made another list. Heirlooms, personal files, photos, the wedding dish set I hadn't used in 20 years but still couldn't part with, and the bookshelf, the one Bram wanted to replace. That would be packed first. I didn't need space. I needed distance. Iris sent me 3 options: a bungalow near Milwaukee, a small-town duplex in Indiana, and the third, a 2-bedroom cabin tucked beside a lake in northern Michigan. No neighbors in view, chipped patio, peeling paint around the windows. But the lake just behind the back porch was quiet, still, undisturbed. I chose that one. It wasn't listed online. It wasn't part of any chain or agency. The owner was a widower in his 70s trying to move closer to his daughter. Iris had sold him the place 15 years ago. He remembered her voice instantly. "She told me you're the right kind of quiet," he said over the phone. "That's what this place needs. Someone who doesn't need noise. I don't." We didn't haggle. He named a price under market and said if I could wire it quickly, the cabin was mine. No agents, no banks, just a clean transaction. I set up the transfer under my maiden name. Had the funds pulled from a secondary account Bram didn't know existed. I used a separate email for communication and had all documents sent to a rented mailbox 3 towns over. The only person who knew was Iris. "I'll burn the trail behind you," she said. "They won't find a footprint." While the apartment slowly emptied behind closed doors, I filled a folder with everything tied to the cabin sale confirmation deed inspection records, utilities paperwork, all in my name. No one else's. That night, I stood in the middle of my sewing room, arms crossed, and tried to picture the new space. The cabin had no sewing nook, but it had a window facing west, enough sunlight to stitch by, a small deck to read on, a wood-burning stove. Not luxury, not comfort, just enough. Enough to be mine. I started taking mental inventory. What would I bring? The Singer machine, my journals, the coffee press, 3 photo frames, 1 coat. Nothing else that could be used to track, question, or stake claim. Bram texted the next morning. "Need confirmation about what day we can start measurements for furniture." Then 5 minutes later, "Want to make sure the painters have access to the right keys." I didn't answer. Instead, I sent a message to the cabin's current owner, confirming the wire had gone through. He replied with a smiley face and a time-stamped PDF of the transaction. The cabin was mine. While Bram was trying to schedule painters, I was signing paperwork that severed me from him completely. That same afternoon, Iris drove over to hand me the key herself. It was small and silver, attached to an old bottle opener, shaped like a loon. "Don't lose this," she said. "That door's original. So's the lock." I held it in my palm, heavier than it looked. "No one else has a copy?" I asked. "Nope, just you." I stood on the balcony that night, watching the city pulse beneath me, and turned the key over in my hand until the metal warmed to my skin. Inside, the boxes were labeled and ready, but the goodbyes were quiet. I hadn't said anything to Bram, nothing to Tierney, and I wouldn't. They hadn't earned the right to know what came next. By morning, I had arranged for Frank the handyman from church with a quiet mouth and a reliable truck to arrive on Friday. He'd pack the non-essentials, load the cabinet, carry the bookshelf Bram had dismissed as outdated. I wouldn't tell Frank where the cabin was, just that it was mine. I left it there on purpose, an old suitcase with a scuffed corner upright by the door. Empty, but zipped tight. Tierney noticed it the next time she stopped by unannounced. She had her usual smile on the one that stretched too far and didn't touch her eyes. Her hands were full, a bag of vitamins, a cup of iced coffee with too much foam, and a paper napkin. She waved like it mattered. "You going somewhere?" she asked, too light, too quick. "Just for a few days," I said. She nodded, too eager. "That's good. You could use a break." reset a little. She didn't ask where. She didn't care where. She just wanted to know how long. The suitcase gave her the answer she needed, soon not permanent, harmless. I let her talk while she hovered near the dining table, sipping her drink and glancing toward the hallway like she expected it to be half-packed already. I stayed quiet, only responding when required. She didn't stay long. She left the vitamins on the counter and mentioned something about a recliner delivery that Bram might schedule next week. That space where the credenza is, he thinks it'll fit perfectly. I smiled once briefly and walked her to the door. When it closed behind her, I locked it and pushed the suitcase slightly forward, just enough so Bram would notice if he came by. They needed to believe I was still pliable, still slow to move, still planning around them. Meanwhile, I was scheduling pickups, finalizing paperwork, forwarding my mail through USPS, and changing my emergency contact to Iris. The buyer's funds cleared 2 days early. Iris called me the moment the deed transferred. "It's done," she said. "You don't own the apartment anymore." I looked around the room. My living room for now, but no longer mine on paper, no longer mine in law. Bram's plans meant nothing now. The nursery boards, the color swatches, the social media captions about fresh starts, they all floated on fantasy. I'd sold the very ground beneath their assumptions. That night, I got a text from Bram. "Hey, Tier says you're going out of town. Just give us a heads up when you're back so we can coordinate painters." They still believed. They still thought the timeline was theirs to control. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the closet and packed the suitcase for real. Not much, 3 sets of clothes, 2 photo frames, my journals. The deed to the cabin folded in a plastic sleeve. The rest was either already boxed or staying behind. The movers would arrive in 3 days. Frank would come with them, no questions, just labor. And the apartment. The apartment was no longer my concern. I walked into the kitchen and placed a sticky note on the fridge. Utilities off Friday at 3:00 p.m. Final key left in drawer. Let them find silence. Let them open the door and feel the absence like a slap. The suitcase stood upright again by the door that night. This time it wasn't empty. It came just after noon on Thursday. Sharp, insistent. Not a friendly rhythm. I didn't move. I was standing in the hallway, already dressed, hair pulled back, papers sorted on the kitchen table. I knew the knock. I recognized the pause between the first and second series. Bram always trying to sound casual when he was pressing down hard. Then I heard it. The faint scrape of metal. He was trying his old key. I waited. Silent. Still. I had changed the locks the week before. The building manager had raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. I'd filed it under a maintenance request with no family contacts allowed. The key turned once. Didn't catch. Turned again, faster now, impatient. Then silence. I could picture him on the other side, turning toward the hallway, glancing around, realizing that something had shifted and he hadn't been told. "Mom," he called through the door. "Open up. We need to talk." I stepped back. Not out of fear, but clarity. I didn't owe him access. I didn't owe him comfort. "I know you're home," he continued. Voice rising. "Tier said you were packing. What's going on? We're all confused here." No one was confused. They just weren't in control anymore. After another long pause, I heard the rustle of paper. A soft shuffle like something sliding beneath the door. An envelope appeared, cream-colored, thick. I didn't touch it at first. I let him walk away. Only after the hallway went quiet did I kneel down and pick it up. Typed on the front, Callista Wren resident. Inside, a letterhead from a law office I didn't recognize, and a document titled Petition for Transitional Guardianship Review. The section labeled Cause had been highlighted. Words like cognitive uncertainty pattern of erratic decision-making and concern for elder autonomy stood out like bruises. I read it once, then again. Bram was laying the groundwork. He wasn't asking for permission. He was preparing to prove I couldn't manage my own life. that I was unstable, unfit, in need of his oversight, his hand on the wheel legally and financially. I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out my phone. Lenore answered on the first ring. "They're escalating," I said. "Tell me everything." I read the letter aloud. She didn't interrupt, just made a sound like a throat closing at the word guardianship. "They're building a case," she said finally. "Not just against your ownership, but against your capacity. What do? We lock it down. Every record, every proof of clarity. I want your bank history, your journals, your time-stamped documents, everything. I have it," I told her. "Good," she said. "Now we make it airtight. Because once someone frames you as forgetful people, stop listening to what you remember." After we hung up, I began scanning everything. Receipts, emails, journal pages, voice memos of me explaining my financial decisions out loud with dates and references. I compiled it all into a folder labeled Competency File and shared it with Lenore's secure drive. The apartment felt even more temporary now, not because I was leaving, but because they had already tried to erase me from it. The next morning, I added one final piece of documentation to the folder, a copy of the apartment sale agreement. Signed. Sealed. Closed. Legally, the space no longer belonged to me. And still, Bram had tried to take it. By Friday, I had everything boxed, sealed, and ready for Frank. When the buzzer rang, I opened the door. It was the screaming that caught my attention. Not violent, not dangerous. Just loud enough to make my upstairs neighbor shuffle toward his door and peer through the peephole. I stayed inside. The movers had just finished. The bookshelf was gone. So was the desk. The last box, my journals and letters, sat at my feet as I sat on the bare floor, legs crossed, listening. "Is this what you want?" Tierney shouted from the hallway. "You're shutting out your grandchild." There it was. She was crying now, or pretending to. Her voice pitched, high and brittle. "You said you'd help us. You said we were welcome here." I imagined the phone already recording. I imagined the angle carefully chosen, her mascara probably dabbed a little messier than needed. She didn't care if I responded. She just wanted a frame. And sure enough, I heard the chime. A video notification. It took under an hour. Pregnant. No home. Family betrayal. Posted publicly. Pinned to her profile. Her face filled the screen, red eyes, quivering lip, one hand over her stomach. The same soft gray sweater she always wore when trying to look vulnerable. The caption told a carefully edited story. We were so excited. We thought she'd be thrilled. But now, she won't even open the door, just because we asked for a little space to raise her first grandchild. A still shot of the closed door. My door. No sound. Just that single word "leave" captured from when I cracked the door and said it once. It looked cold. It looked final. It looked like guilt. The comments poured in. How could a mother do this? She doesn't deserve to be called grandma. Boomer hoarders are ruining everything for young families. You're better off without her. 4,000 likes. Hundreds of shares. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I screenshot every comment, saved the video, archived the post, and emailed everything to Lenore under the subject line "False Narrative Public Distribution." She replied within 5 minutes. Documented. Keep your phone off. They're building emotion. We're building facts. I powered the phone down and slid it into the file box. Let them believe whatever they wanted. They were building sympathy like a sandcastle in the tide, pretty for a moment, but soft, weak, and always waiting to collapse. That night, I wrote a final list in my notebook. The final item read, "Public opinion does not own my story." I closed the book, wrapped the twine around the final box, and stood up from the floor. Outside, the hallway was quiet again. Tierney had left. But she'd left something behind: a performance. I would leave something behind too. But mine wouldn't ask for sympathy. It would ask for distance. The next morning, a new message waited in my inbox from Bram. If you want to avoid court, sign the attached, and we'll forget all of this. A PDF. Deed transfer. His name signed. Tierney's too. Just one line left blank. Mine. I didn't open it. I didn't hesitate. I forwarded it to Lenore. Then I texted Bram one sentence. You'll be served within the week. Do not contact me again. Then I turned off my phone. Again. This time for good. It arrived on a Tuesday mid-morning, plain envelope, no frills. Just another piece of mail in the stack at my temporary P.O. box. I opened it without ceremony, but my hands still paused when I saw the title. Residential Deed Transfer. Pending final signature. Their names were already there. Bram. Tierney. Two neatly typed names signed and dated with just one space left for mine. I didn't feel shock. That had worn off weeks ago. There was no heat behind my eyes, no tightness in my throat. I'd run out of outrage. All I felt was confirmation. They really thought I'd sign it. They really believed that if they sent it enough times in just the right tone, with just enough passive pressure, I'd eventually cave. There wasn't even a note attached this time, just the form tucked cleanly into a glossy folder. A final push dressed up as professionalism. I laid the folder on the kitchen table next to my coffee, snapped a picture of the signature line, and attached it to an email with the subject line, "Third attempt." No signature. Lenore responded in under 10 minutes. Received. Understood. Do not reply to them. Preparing final service documents. I opened my phone, stared at Bram's last few texts, the ones asking if we could just talk this out, if we could be reasonable, if I was okay. Then I typed, "You'll be served within the week. Do not contact me again." I sent it and blocked his number. Tierney's too. I stood by the sink, watching wind move through the trees outside the cabin, and exhaled, without realizing I'd been holding my breath. I wasn't scared anymore. They could send another fake baby announcement. They could film another hallway sob story for sympathy. They could write captions about family legacy and new beginnings all they wanted. But legally, they were nowhere. And I wasn't going back. I made a fresh pot of coffee, black, no sugar. I opened my filing cabinet, slid the document into the section labeled False Claims, and locked the drawer. The next morning, the process server called to confirm delivery. Paperwork would be in Bram's hands within 48 hours. The papers wouldn't just reject the deed, they would serve as official notification of revocation of all financial rights, powers of attorney, and any claim to my estate. My lawyer had crafted it perfectly. There were no loopholes left. No soft corners. Nothing to twist. No one would be able to say I wasn't clear. That I hadn't made a decision. That I didn't mean it. I left the cabin that afternoon and drove into town. Picked up more ink for the printer, a few brown envelopes, and a new padlock for the exterior shed. I stopped by the post office, added Lenore's office to my permanent forwarding file, and closed the last open box under my married name. Every move now left a record. Every document tracked. And I was done playing along with their script. By nightfall, the final PDF had been signed, dated, notarized, and emailed back to Lenore. The estate was updated, the trust renamed, and Bram and Tierney were gone from every page. The lawyer's office was quiet. No glass walls, no dramatic oak desk, no tense family members huddled in corners, waiting for their names to be called. Just me, Lenore, and the clean echo of decisions that finally held their shape. She slid the final draft across the desk. "This version reflects every update," she said, tapping her pen on the first page. "Primary residence, liquid assets, remainder of the apartment sale, even the old life insurance policy. All directed to the fund." I read it once, then again. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I needed to see it in writing in my own time, with no one rushing me. Every line was clear, every designation airtight. Not a dollar to Bram, not a clause left open to interpretation. No fallback beneficiaries, no vague language like at the discretion of the family. Just a clean, hard wall between what they tried to claim and what they would never touch again. I signed my name with the same pen Lenore had used to draft the first version, back when Bram was still calling me Mom without bitterness. The ink dried fast. "That's it," she said. I nodded and slid the document back. "Now file it." She did silently. Then she handed me a copy mine to keep, and just under the heading, Designated Trust Recipient, was the name I'd chosen weeks ago, but hadn't said out loud until now. The Quiet Exit Fund. She looked at it, then at me. "It's a good name. It's what I needed," I said. Silence without surrender. The fund would be small at first, a drop compared to what people usually imagine when they hear the word legacy, but it would be real, tangible. It would help women like me, older, widowed, isolated, cornered by manipulation that dressed itself up as care. Women who were told they were being dramatic. Women who had their names on deeds but no voice at the dinner table. Women who knew something was off but couldn't quite put their finger on it until it was too late. The cabin was part of it now, too. Eventually, it would pass to the fund, along with everything inside it. The journals, the herb garden, even the filing cabinet locked tight beneath my bed. Lenore sealed everything with a final stamp and placed the papers in her drawer. She didn't offer congratulations. I didn't need any. I drove back to the cabin with the windows down and the folder seat belted beside me. The sky had turned overcast, but it didn't feel heavy. Just quiet. The kind of quiet I'd built my escape inside. When I got home, I placed the folder inside a drawer marked Final. Then I poured a cup of coffee, stepped onto the porch, and watched the clouds drift above the lake, slow and steady. By the time the first drops of rain tapped the roof, I had already moved on to making dinner. No ceremony, no toast, just butter, sizzling in a pan, garlic softening, and the scent of something finally mine curling into the walls. And then came the sound I hadn't heard in weeks. Tires on gravel, a car pulling up. I didn't need to look. I already knew. It was just after 6 when the car rolled up the gravel path. A silver SUV too clean for a road like this. I watched it stop near the base of the drive headlights, cutting briefly through the trees before someone switched them off. Then the doors opened. Bram stepped out first, still in the blazer he wore to every family dinner, even the ones where he didn't stay long. Tierney followed, heels clicking against the stone, holding a bottle of wine wrapped in tissue paper. They were dressed like company, as if this were an invitation they hadn't waited for. I stood in the kitchen, just out of sight, hands resting on the back of the chair. The only light in the cabin came from the low lamp above the sink, casting long shadows across the floor. I didn't move. I didn't need to. They approached the porch slowly, as if rehearsing softness. Then Bram knocked. Once, twice firm, but not forceful. "Mom," he called. "We just want to talk." I didn't answer. The silence stretched long enough to shift the rhythm of their visit. From performance to doubt. Tierney's voice followed higher, brittle. "We know things got messy, but this doesn't have to be the end." The porch creaked as they shifted their weight. The bottle clinked against something, probably the post, as she tried to make their presence feel casual, unthreatening, familiar. "I brought your favorite," she said louder now. "Pinot Noir, the one from your birthday last year." I hadn't liked that bottle, but she never remembered that part. They knocked again. Bram tried the handle. It didn't turn. I'd changed the locks 2 days after moving in, just in case. "Can we come in?" he asked, softer now. "Please." Still, I stayed behind the wall. Still, I said nothing. The pause between their knocks stretched again. I could hear Tierney's shoes scrape the floorboards. "Are you really going to shut us out like this?" she snapped. "Your own grandchild." The bait again. The one word they thought would melt everything. Grandchild. A phantom promise, still unproven, still wielded like a key they didn't have. Silence met them again. They stood there for another 3 minutes. Then 5. Finally, Bram placed the wine on the step and turned to leave. Tierney lingered half a beat longer. "I hope you're proud of yourself," she muttered. And then they were gone. The SUV reversed slowly, gravel crunching under the tires until it vanished between the trees. I stayed in place until even the tail lights disappeared. Then I stepped out onto the porch and picked up the wine. The label said, "Forgiveness." I poured it down the sink. Later that evening, I opened my laptop to find one final message from Bram waiting in my inbox, like a last stone hurled at a closed window. "You win. Hope it was worth losing your family." I didn't open it. I didn't write back. I saved the message, screenshotted the timestamp, and filed it under the folder labeled Closure. Then I deleted his contact and turned off the light. The next morning, I made coffee and walked barefoot into the garden. Mint, thyme, rosemary curling under the wind. That same wind carried the faint sound of a new message vibrating from a number I didn't know. I didn't open the message right away. Just the subject line was enough to tell me what tone he'd taken. Bitter. Final. Like a door slamming from the other side. "You win. Hope it was worth losing your family." He thought that line would land like a blade. What he didn't know was that I'd already buried the version of family he meant. The one where I was silent, yielding the last adult in the room, expected to play peacekeeper in a house I no longer lived in. I read the message once just to confirm there was no legal threat hidden inside. There wasn't. Just blame dressed in self-pity. A child's tantrum typed with adult grammar. I closed the screen and hit delete. Not archived. Not saved for court. Just deleted. Some things didn't deserve to be filed. That morning, I went outside with a small shovel and the box of herb starters Iris had dropped off the week before. Mint, thyme, basil, sage. I planted them in rows, one at a time, careful with the roots pressing the soil with bare hands. It was early still. The air had that crisp edge that smelled like damp stone and pine needles. I worked slowly, with intention. As I moved from pot to pot, I thought about every moment I'd ever spent making excuses for them, telling myself they were young, stressed, confused, newly married. I thought about all the times I'd absorbed their carelessness like I was built to cushion it, and I thought about the lie they had told each other to make it okay, that I was just lonely, that I'd want to give them the apartment, that it was a gift waiting to be claimed. Not once had they stopped to ask what I wanted. Now they didn't get to know. By the time the garden bed was finished, my hands were sore and damp. I stood back and looked at the rose, green, stubborn, fragrant. Something new that belonged to no one but me. The phone buzzed again later that afternoon, another unfamiliar number. I didn't answer, but curiosity won, and I let it go to voicemail. Ashley's voice came through the speaker, trying to sound tender. "Hi, Mary. It's me. I know things got messy, and I just wanted to say, we're still hoping to keep a door open. For the baby. For the future. Please call." She didn't sound angry. She sounded cornered, like someone who thought the performance would last forever. I deleted the message without listening to the rest, because the only door that mattered now was the one they'd never get to walk through again. The next morning, I met with Lenore again to finalize the last signatures. The documents were crisp, weighty. Legally, everything was sealed. The trust was live. The fund had a name. The money was untouchable. And the will had a clause that barred them from contesting it, speaking on my behalf, or touching a single item I left behind. As we finished, Lenore slid me a hard copy and said quietly, They may try one more time. Just for show. I nodded. They won't get in. I went home, made coffee, and sat on the porch. The lake was still. The sun was slow behind the trees. And inside my inbox, a new subject line blinked. Can we start over? There was no name, just an attachment. A photo. A sonogram. Fake. I recognized it immediately from the app Tierney used in one of her early vision board posts. They had printed it, framed it, mailed it like a peace offering. It was sitting at the foot of my door in a slim white box wrapped in tissue. I left it unopened on the counter and turned off my phone. It popped up in my feed one morning while I was scrolling without really thinking. A photo, sunlit, warm, casual. A young couple smiling in a familiar room. My old living room. Same window, same crown molding, same floors I'd refinished with my husband after a pipe burst in '03. It had been listed quietly, sold, quickly. I hadn't expected to see it again, but there it was. They'd painted the walls a soft white, taken down the curtains Tierney once mocked. But the bookshelf, his bookshelf was still there. The one Bram called outdated. The one Tierney planned to donate. Now it held plants. A pothos trailing over the edge, a small stack of books tucked on the lower shelf, a ceramic mug used as a planter. Not flashy, not staged, just lived in. I stared at it longer than I meant to. Not with regret. With recognition. They didn't tear the place apart. They didn't gut the soul out of it. They simply stepped into it with quiet respect, like it was enough as it was. Like I had been enough. I took a screenshot not for documentation, just to keep. Then I set the phone aside and stood. The coffee had finished brewing in the corner. I poured a cup strong and black and walked out onto the porch barefoot. It had rained the night before, and the boards were still cool beneath my feet. A breeze carried the scent of wet pine and turned pages from the book I'd forgotten open on the chair. I sat, tucked my legs beneath me, and took a slow sip. This wasn't a moment I would post. There was no caption for it. No lesson, no quote, no revenge, just stillness. It wasn't victory, not in the way people expect, no courtroom gasp, no dramatic confrontation, no reclaimed keys. But it was peace. I had no more letters to sign, no messages to ignore, no fabricated pregnancies or deed requests to untangle. The phone buzzed once more on the armrest beside me, another unknown number. I powered it off without looking. Not from fear, from completion. They could call it betrayal. They could call it abandonment. They could twist it however they needed to sleep at night. But I had finally stepped out of the version of family they had tried to build around me. The kind where love came with contracts. The kind where silence was used against you. The kind where survival had to look like gratitude. Now there were herbs sprouting in the garden. Fresh basil, thyme, and mint fighting their way up from damp soil. My hands still bore faint scratches from planting them, reminders of something rooted. Inside, the file cabinet was closed, the trust sealed, the legal trail wrapped tight around the choices I made on purpose, and the door locked from the inside. I looked out across the lake, sunlight now hitting the water with quiet certainty. They could scream into the wind all they wanted, but they wouldn't hear back from me, not ever again. And finally, that wasn't grief. It was peace.